Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is John Serri, or Surrey, excuse me, John Surrey. And we are meeting for the first time, and we've been talking about what we're going to talk about, and we still have not decided what we're going to talk about. So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you live, by the way?
First of all, Ed, thank you for inviting me on your podcast. It's
My
it's
pleasure.
nice to meet you, and I do like the open format that you're proposing here. So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh,
I've lived in California for about 30 years now. Uh, I started as an East Coast person. Some of your listeners may detect a hint of a New York accent, or actually quite a strong New York accent. So
yeah.
I grew up in New York City, first generation um, Italian family. So my father came from Venice. My mother was from Sardinia. So I grew up in a sort of an Italian world in New York City. Um, we were poor, and I always never had much sense of being poor. Well, it's interesting. So we were quite poor. We always had enough to eat though, but I always thought I was rich because um, I said, we have a television set. How can we have a television set? My father has a car. So I looked at that and I thought back, well, back 100 years ago, no one had a TV set. There were no cars back then. So I always felt good about that. But I always had an element of frugality all through my life. And it was interesting that there was always low expectations set on me. So I was actually born with a birth defect. Uh, so I was born with a club foot. I don't know if you know what that is, but it was very common. About 1 in 1,000 babies have it, and it's associated with the mother uh, smoking a lot. There's a strong correlation. I was born with this. But fortunately, there was a doctor who put my foot into a cast, which was just beginning to be a medical practice at that time. So, as I look back on that many years, um, I'm very appreciative of that. I mean, and it makes me think about in this world, uh, there have been so many people that have kept me from going completely into a bad space. That there's an appreciation that I have that's come through my life, and I've come to appreciate that over the last 5 years or so.
How old are you?
I'm 70 years old, going to be 71 this month. So,
Congratulations. I'm about 7 months ahead of you.
okay, congratulations as well.
So you grew up in one of the great eras of New York. You know,
It was, go ahead.
well, I love New York. Can sing the song because of the mid 20th century culture that was there. That vitality of the jazz scene and the sports scene surrounding the Dodgers, the Giants, and the Yankees. I mean, it was such a vital center of American life.
Yeah, New York was really something. Now, New York is comprised of five boroughs, as you probably know, and there's many different neighborhoods, and there's many different types of food, many different types of cultures, all kind of living together. So there was a book written in the early 60s called The Melting Pot, which talked about the different ethnic groups in New
Right.
York City. And it was very much that. And it was over time, these groups, the melting pot kind of melded together. And it created you took the best of all of these cultures and you ended up with something better. And that is the case of New York. Now, at the time that I was growing up in New York, New York became gentrified in the 1980s, 1990s.
Mhm.
In the late 50s, it was a very sooty kind of place. I remember when I was a kid, I lived near the East River in Brooklyn. And almost every day in the afternoon, I would get these little particles in my eye. I thought that was normal living, but that was actually these dust particles coming from the soot that was coming out of chimneys
Oh
back
yeah.
then. And the
Yes.
water was completely dirty. You couldn't go near it. There were no fish in the East River. It was just bad. And actually, New York City went through a bankruptcy in the early 1970s, late 1960s. New York City went bankrupt. They couldn't pay the employees. So it went through a lot of turmoil. But then there was this gentrification of the city itself that after I had left New York City, it bloomed into an even greater place. So uh, I'm happy that I came from New York City. And one thing I've noticed is, and I've said this to many people, when you grow up in New York, you either come out real good or you come out real bad, because it is sort of a polarizing, dramatic type of culture.
Yeah, it's a remarkable place, and um, it's still a remarkable place, but it's not the same place as it was in the 50s and 60s. But not spent as much time there in the last 10 years as I would have liked, but the time I've been there, I've really enjoyed it, um, and I've spent a lot. And I went to school in Boston, so Boston has that similar character to it. And my daughter lived in Philadelphia for a while, and so I got to know Philadelphia. Those three cities on the east coast of America are so pivotal in the character of America, and a lot of my family came from Germany and Scotland, and um, and they all came through Philadelphia. They came. That's where they entered. And this is back in the 1700s, even before we were a country. We were still part of England at that point in time. But I really love those cities, and I love the character of them. Love the culture that's emerged. You know, I went to seminary up in Boston, and one of my friends in seminary was a Puerto Rican from Brooklyn, and one Easter I went home with him and stayed with him in his family's apartment, and they were all speaking Spanish. I didn't have a look, and we just had such a wonderful time with that Puerto Rican community, and that's one of the great things about America.
It is. Yeah, Puerto Rico is a special place. I've spent a lot of time there, and um, it's a territory of the United States. So you don't need a passport or a visa if you live in Puerto Rico to enter the U.S. So there's open border, so to speak.
Right.
So half of the population of Puerto Rico actually lives in the US. And there's a big fraction of that is in New York City and Philadelphia. I think there's a lot of Puerto Ricans as well. It's interesting. And yeah, I've spent a lot of time in Boston as well. And I went to school there. And it was very much, similar East Coast culture. Uh, I noticed a big difference in the culture, say, of New York. And now I'm in a very different culture here, which is a very much of um, the degree of risk is different in these
Yeah.
cultures.
You're
So
in you're in the Bay Area, San Francisco,
yeah,
and
yeah.
where specifically are you?
Well, I'm in you might call it the East Bay. It's a town called Pleasanton, California. So
Hmm.
it's maybe about 25 miles from San Francisco. The Bay has different mountain ranges. So I'm one mountain range from the Bay.
Uh-huh.
and I live near the Hayward Fault. If there's
Yeah.
ever a big earthquake, I hope we don't have one during this podcast. I'll probably end up going off
Well,
the air.
it'll be historic if it is.
It might be. I'll let you know if I detect any shaking. Uh, but maybe there's something that has something to do with risk. So what I noticed on the East Coast, particularly, I also spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. And so I've sensed the difference in the cultures of these cities. So Boston, I found to be a very honest type of society, very conservative
Uh-huh.
society. So people, they made sure they had their insurance. They wouldn't take big risks when it came to, say, starting up a company. Much more conservative mindset uh, than on the West Coast. It's very different here. That's one of the reasons why I moved out here. Is there's much more emphasis on innovation and to some degree risk taking and being you can try new things and you can make mistakes and it's sort of understood. Whereas other places, it's not quite as appreciated in terms of that risk taking. And that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of the innovation in the US coming out of California and the Bay Area. There really is a different mindset that people have when they're out here, or maybe it attracts those type of persons.
So what kind of work have you done over the course of your life?
Oh, well, I've always been a scientist at heart. So
Uh,
even when I was 3 or 4 years old, um, I just had this love of science, and I had this photographic memory for science. I was actually dyslexic as a kid, and I flunked through school. I flunked math, and I had trouble with symbols, and I didn't understand why the teachers were repeating themselves so many times. So I kind of did myself in. But I eventually got into an academic mindset, and I proceeded from a very bad student to I ended up getting a PhD in physics from MIT.
wow.
So I went, yeah. So that's I won't go through all of the degrees, all of the things that happened in between there. Although it's a story in of itself where I went from being one of the worst students in high school, well, not the worst, but the mediocre student to the best student in my high school. And so what got me from one place to the other, there's a number of events that occurred and a number of things I deliberately did to get to that point. But at heart, I was a scientist. So I got a PhD at MIT, and I worked with some very good people. And again, when I talk about appreciation, uh, I was very fortunate to go there, to be able to study there. And I was mentored by my main mentor, ended up winning the Nobel Prize in Physics. His name was Bill Phillips. He won the Nobel Prize in 1997. And, uh, I never thought he would win the Nobel Prize. It's an interesting thing. But he was a very good, consistent scientist. And he taught me the nuts and bolts of being a good experimentalist. I was an experimental physicist. I went out to Bell Laboratories and I worked there in a research area in surface physics, and there was some good work there, but it wasn't quite MIT. There was a difference in the mindset of the place. MIT was somewhat of a higher intellectual level, but Bell Laboratories was quite good also, and I worked with a few Nobel Prize winners there as well. Uh, but I grew up as a poor kid. My family had no money. I wanted to live a middle class life. So I kind of shied away from academia. That was not, and I didn't have the kind of the social upbringing that comes with becoming a professor kind of person. And then people may argue about that, but so I decided to go into industry. So at Bell Laboratories, I was part of AT&T. I just liked that. And I always was a scientist, but I also, one day my professor at MIT came to me, my advisor, another great man named David Pritchard. He came to me and said, John, you have killer instinct. I looked at him and I said, what does that mean? He says, you have a future in management. So I was at MIT a couple months ago telling that story, and everybody laughed. So he was basically saying, you're not going to cut it as a great academic, but you can probably do well in industry or business. So I took that to heart, and actually he was right. So at Bell Laboratories, I got more and more involved in engineering type of work. And again, I was always interested, even as a child, always concerned about the nuclear arms race. So this was I was at AT&T back in the early 80s. And at that time, the Reagan administration was funding uh, companies, government agencies related to SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. And this actually scared the Russians into kind of submission, I believe.
Yeah.
But there was a tremendous amount of money being spent. AT&T, I was involved in dealing with the survivability of AT&T's network. So I got in, started testing equipment under these huge antennas that would generate what was called high altitude electromagnetic pulse. Because the fear was, and it's still a very valid concern, if you detonate a weapon at high altitude above the atmosphere, what you will get on the ground is an extremely large electrical pulse.
Right.
That electrical pulse will be absorbed by your computer, your smartphone, various equipment, and that'll create a current, and it could actually damage the equipment. So I was involved in that sort of stuff, and uh, I was thriving in it. I loved it. So I was working with the U.S. government, uh, at that point, and eventually I got more and more involved with working for the U.S. government, and I got into more like the aerospace business. And this is the kind of stuff, I really can't talk about in any detail, but it was related to communications. It was related to satellites. And I did that work. And that's where I met some people that I said, wow, I was in Washington working at AT&T, and I was working with one of the big government agencies. And it was a very political environment. It was way beyond my political capabilities. Again, I'm rather simple in a sense. I'm a scientist. I'm not a politician, but I was kind of at AT&T and ended up being in a very political kind of position. I was running a department that was working with this agency, and I had people, different factions in AT&T, the most difficult job in my life. And literally, you heard the expression, you get stabbed in the back. That was routine. I was being stabbed in the back constantly. But then I met some people from Lockheed at that time, and they said, yeah, on the West Coast, we actually build things. And that's how I got over to the West Coast. And I went from there into aerospace. Um, I don't know if I'm going into too much detail, Ed, but
No, this is fascinating. I think people are interested in the course that people take through their careers.
yeah,
I mean, I think about my father, who um, he was a turret gunner on a B-29 in the Pacific during the Second World War. Came home, went to college, graduated, went to work for a company in our hometown here, and he worked there until he retired. He was there for 37 years. And, you know, and, it never appealed to me that kind of consistency of being in one place for all those years would be something of interest to me, and it never worked out that way. But what I think is true for our generation and also younger generations is that post World War II, the opening up of science and the opening up of industry and academia and all these other fields began to open up so that there was opportunities that didn't exist in our parents' generation. And uh, and so I think it's fascinating. And and I would say also that you grew up in a time where the the quantum mechanics of the physics world began to emerge as something that was not just a theoretical thing that the highest intellects would talk about, but it became something very practical and real and useful. Am I right
That's
about
so
that?
true. You're absolutely right. When I was in high school and starting as an undergraduate in college, I went to the State University of New York at Albany, and I did very well there. So but I, I was debating whether I should become a chemist, a physicist, or a mathematician. So I was, good in all three at that point. But physics was beautiful. It was truly beautiful. And it started with one of the great places in physics is with Isaac Newton, who created the first unification theory in physics. So this was, the same force that, you hear the story of the apple dropping on the ground, hitting him in the head while he's sleeping, was the same force that was governing how the moon circled the earth, how the earth circled the sun, so on and so forth. So, and it was just a few simple equations, and then you can do all of this stuff. I said, my gosh, that's
Remarkable.
what it is remarkable.
Yeah.
And it is an amazing thing. Physics is amazing. I would encourage anybody who is debating whether they should go into physics or not, really give it serious consideration, because what it does is it the type of thinking, the unification theory, say the classical theory of mechanics, is this complicated phenomena that nobody understood could be distilled into a set of simple equations and then applied. But you know what? That's actually true in lots of life. When you're designing an economic system, when you're designing a aircraft, you're designing a communication network, you have to sort of abstract the details and come up with a model, a framework that that you can use. And that's what physics training really does. And I've used that all through my career. So I was able to jump you know, from atomic physics, studying how one argon atom interacted with a sodium atom, to how a atom is on the surface, then to how nuclear weapons work, then to how communication networks work, the satellites and other things. And I've gotten to software later in my career. And then finally, I started up this company, EyeQue, which has been a journey in and of itself. So, but that training, the physics training, really does help a great deal to take you there in terms of being able to deal with many different problems. I'm not sure how we got to this point, but here we are.
I was a very average student all the way through, because I was interested in other things, and I was not very analytical in my thought process as a young man, and I was just interested in people, and in which put me in a really difficult spot because most of the careers, I mean, we're roughly the same age. Most of those careers back in the 70s and 80s were highly technical careers, and you needed to have some math skills, and you needed to have some language skills, and you needed to, I mean, even if you went to graduate school, you had to be able to think analytically. And and I had to teach myself how to do that.
Yes, it's true.
But the thing which is interesting to me now is the history of physics and the those trends. And one of those, and I'm sharing this because this is such an important thing to me. One of those um, moments in time is the 1927 Solvang conference, where all those Nobel Prize laureates came together. And I'm thinking about that period of time because that was such a pivotal time. And you had Einstein, and you had Curry, and you had all these giants of the world of physics there and mathematics. I mean, I'm not one of them. I'm not in their league at all. But I appreciate who they are and what they've done, and how they were moving towards a sense of, well, we've figured this all out. And then oh my goodness, then Gödel shows up, and Heisenberg shows up with their principles of uncertainty and not being able to prove things. And that, to me, John, is the beauty of the whole thing, is that it is also very specific, but it's also beyond us ever being in absolute control of it.
It's right. It's very interesting, and I'm glad we're talking about this. So, going back to the history of physics in the sort of the mid to late 1800s, you had what was called classical physics,
Mhm.
and and everybody thought that physics was done. There was just details left. How heat worked, and everything could be explained basically using uh, Newton's laws. And then there was some Maxwell, another great physicist, came up with a way of unifying electricity and magnetism. So you had this the classical theory of physics at that point. But then uh, there was some problems. Instrumentation was getting better, and people started to see, you know, I can't explain this with classical physics. And so there was two major intellectual leaps made in the early 1800s. So one of the first was a fellow by the name of Max Planck, who realized that um, it turned out the way black body radiation was generated, it couldn't be explained with classical theories of physics. So, but he could explain it if energy was quantized. In other words, energy was not a continuous thing, but it came in little packets. So that was one big thing. Around that same time, you had Einstein come in. And Einstein, again, he's another person of a completely different class. He's almost unhuman in some of the things he's done, but then he was a great humanist, as a great person. He came up with the special theory of relativity because there was a problem. People with light. So light's an amazing thing. No one's quite figured it out yet, right? I mean, we deal with light all the time. In fact, I'm writing books about light, and I deal with light with EyeQue. It's an optics type of company.
Ah,
But the point with light was people thought that light traveled through something called an ether, just like it was a wave. So it was a wave, it traveled through the ether. So there had to be something like an ether out there. But no one could find it. In fact, there were experiments done, experiment by Michelson Morley at the Naval Observatory. They tried to set up interferometers, and I won't go into the details. I'll probably get it wrong if I try to. But they could not see this ether. Light always seemed to travel at the same speed. So Einstein said, gee, you know what? I'm going to reformulate um, the observable world by assuming that no matter where you are with respect to a source of light, you'll always measure it at the same speed. This is this speed, which is called c, the speed of light, 3.99 times 10 to the 8th, 3.08 times, whatever it is, 3.08 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. Okay. So you've got this amazing thing. And from that, all sorts of things that could not be explained before came true. So this is the great intellectual leap. And by the time they got to the Solvay constant conference that you're talking about, they were arguing about quantum mechanics, which was the nature of matter. And Einstein himself could not believe about the uncertainty associated with quantum mechanics. So the idea with quantum mechanics is that when you get to small things again, if you get to a small piece of matter, you really can't, it's no longer like a little point. It's better described as a wave. So now in this new world of physics, waves became particles. In other words, light, which was a wave, acted as a single particle, a photon, yet particles themselves became waves to explain it. So there was a big mix-up, and it led to all sorts of things. I myself am 4 generations away from those. I was just thinking about that the other day. You had the great quantum physicists, Pauli, Bohr, Born, Max Born, Heisenberg. Some of these physicists, they were active in the 1920s, 1930s. And then 1 generation after that, there was another group of physicists like Weisskopf and others who refined, made some practical theories. So they started to show how quantum mechanics explains things. One is how stars work. No one understood how stars work. But in the 1930s or so, people figured it out. And it came from the ideas of quantum mechanics. And then my professor at MIT, Kersen Wang, was a student of Weisskopf. Mm-hmm. And I was a student of Wang. So I'm 4 generations away from those great physicists. Now, just I'll say one last thing about physics. People have been thinking that physics is at a stagnation point. And can launch our discussion into another place. And I think it has been. You have string theory, but there's a number of reasons why it's not very good. And people still have been trying to unify gravity with quantum mechanics, and that hasn't quite worked either. So there's physics right now is in a funny place. But the point you made before is because of this physics that was kind of developed in the 1900s to the 1930s or so, we have all this technology today. These computers that we're talking on the networks all came from quantum physics. It didn't come from other things. So this great technology is here. What's happening now is maybe there's two big things in physics that hasn't happened. Why can't you travel faster than the speed of light? Why can't you travel through time? So, there's lots of stuff written about that. I won't go into it. But now people are saying maybe physicists combined with AI will lead to the next set of breakthroughs. And I think that could very well happen. So
my interest in all of this is very practical. So I'm interested in matter, time, space, reality, because I find that our lack of clarity about those things has an effect about how we live as human beings and how human society functions in a healthy way. And that the lack of clarity opens up room for all kinds of really bad ideas that distract us and lead us in directions that are not healthy for us as a race, as a human race. And so those are things that I'm interested in. In fact, I've just begun working on my next book, which And one of the questions is, what is reality? So I'm working that through. And I'm not a physicist, so I don't have to play to that audience, but I can borrow from that audience, if that makes sense.
Yes, you can, and yes, you should. There's a subject here. Um, I believe that the human race is at a crossroads right now,
Mhm.
and we there's so many possibilities. I know before you said about uh, people used to stay in one job for 30 years, and then it's been constantly changing. Well, we're now in a period of rapid evolution of everything, and we have no idea exactly how it's going to turn out. And so there's a lot of people talking about this. It can go from a very dystopian possibilities to very good possibilities, to a point where humanity is living in such abundance that the world is really a much nicer place than it is even today. And you can live much longer, and just things will be really wonderful. But it can go the other way also.
So
And
what's your feelings about the future? Do you have?
yeah, so I spend a lot of time thinking about it. I'm what you would call a techno optimist.
Uh-huh.
So my view is that the future for mankind is likely good, assuming that there's no major catastrophe. So, for example, we could have major catastrophes that have nothing to do with humanity itself. For example, a large asteroid can hit the Earth, and it doesn't have to be that large on the scale of things. Something 10 miles in diameter, 15 miles in diameter, if it hit the Earth,
Yeah.
we'd be gone. Life would be extinguished. We'd go back. The few survivors will go back to a different point and maybe start over again. Uh, but barring some weird kind of global catastrophe, I believe that we will navigate our way through these changes, but it's going to be profound and it's already happening. So if you look at the job market, the number of jobs in technology is decreasing. If you look at the advances in AI, when, for example, ChatGPT is out there, it's there for everybody. I'm able to ask ChatGPT, just draft me up an agreement, a sales agreement, or draft me, something practical in terms of my business. Draft me what a stockholder uh, agreement should look like, and it gives me a template. I didn't have to go to a lawyer and ask for one. I've got a pretty good template as a starting point, and now the lawyer lost maybe a couple of hours of work. But that's going to happen more and more. And in medicine, which I'm dealing with in EyeQue, is that the advances in technology are going to change the role of doctors, and a lot more can be done without doctors. Okay, that's huge. So we're in a place now where we're going to see a drastic change over the next 10 years or so. And if we don't manage that, there's going to be big problems because, it gets to and very much what drives humans, what drives us. So we've evolved to be in a society. We've evolved to be in an environment where we have challenges. We have to find food. We have threats around us. We can get eaten by, a large, crazy group of lions or something. We evolved with that, and our whole social fabric is aimed to advance us. But what happens when you have a technology surrounding you and there's no longer the need? What happens to people if that's the case? And you get a displacement. Even today, in around the world, in Japan, in China, in the United States, there's a large number of men who are still living at home. They have not been able to integrate into society. There's no jobs for them. They sit at home. These guys are 35 years old. They're playing video games. Okay. This is something's wrong here. We have to look at that. The fertility rates in the world are dropping like crazy. People are not interacting. social media is something that is pervasive, and it has a subtle, perhaps destructive effect. So we as a society are going to have to face all of these issues and deal with it. In fact, someone was asking me today, a friend of mine, John, what do we do about this? I go, I think there's going to be a good outcome, but honestly, I don't know how we're going to get there.
Well, here's the way I look at it. I think human innovation, kind of work that you do, maybe the stuff that I do, is always a leading indicator of the future. The lagging indicator is our dependence upon the way we structured things in the past that seem to persist into the future and persist long beyond its shelf life, so to speak. And the way we organize organizations, businesses, society doesn't work very well any longer. And yet we hold on to those old tried and true things because the people who are in power, that's where their power is founded, and that's where their prestige is found, and at some point it does go away. It is not able to be sustained. It's not sustainable. So things change, and I think we're just in that major transitional era where what we've known over the last 200 or 300 years is declining at an ever increasing rate. And what's going to emerge is just now beginning to show itself. And 2 years ago, I was not as optimistic as I am now. I'm very optimistic about the future because I think it's like the conversations that you and I are having right now. I'm having that with people all the time, every day. And, and we're not beholden to some institutional authority or institutional structure, or we're only beholden to the ideas that we're sharing that may lead us to something new.
Wow. I love the way you phrased it, your insights there. I agree with you. The systems that we're being governed by are they're not keeping up with the technology, and things are breaking in part because of that. Looking at optimism, if you look at how humans have evolved over the last 2,000 years, you can see exponential growth. So we're doing pretty well, right? You can see the increase in lifetime of people. So just if you were to be an observer looking at Earth and looking at what's happening to Earth, you say, wow, look at all of these humans. Look at all the biomass of humanity. So they're doing well for some reason. And I think that the wellness will continue, but what will happen with the amount of population that's probably going to decrease? A lot of the population growth goes back to the agricultural period, where you would have children and they had a job. They had to work on a farm, and it was in your benefit to have as many kids as reasonable, because a lot of them wouldn't make it. They would die of diseases or of accidents, but that's completely changed. But what will happen in the future is it's going to have to, governments are going to have to respond to it. Capitalism, the nature of capitalism will have to change. If you look at like a model where, okay, a company has adopted AI. So we don't need workers anymore. We just use AI. Well, wonderful. But think of all those workers, what are they going to do? So they don't have money. How are they going to buy your AI generated products? There's going to have to be some redistribution of wealth, some redistribution of how economics are done. So there's going to be, it has to happen. It has to be a restructuring of our economic systems, which, again, I don't know what they are, but I do know that the resources exist on Earth that we can do that. So one of the projects that I will be working on in the future, I've been talking about this with a number of people, is if you look at the Earth, and again, from a physics standpoint, you look at the amount of resources the Earth has in terms of material and in terms of energy, we could all be living with an even higher standard of living. Okay,
Right.
it becomes a management issue. It's not the ecosystem is going to break down and all of these things. Yeah, it'll break down if you don't manage it, but we can manage it. We can manage it better than we're doing today.
Yeah.
This leads to tremendous opportunities for prosperity, and I think we're going to eventually get there. One of the things I want to do is make it blatantly obvious to people that you can do that, because a lot of people will say to me, you don't know what you're talking about. There's climate change going on. There's only so many rare earth elements that you can get out of the earth to build things. The oil's going to run out. Why hasn't oil run out? You ever wonder about that? In fact, that takes you to a place that almost gets you into the crackpot territory. But, the resources are continuing. I don't know if you remember back in the 70s, in the 60s, there was a book written called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. I read that when I was a kid. Oh my God, we're in big trouble. DDT. She mentioned in the book, I remember, there's only going to be the cabbage butterfly left. Okay, all the other beautiful butterflies in the world are going to disappear, and you'll be lucky to see the little white butterfly. Well, that didn't happen. We still have lots of butterflies around. We still have lots of fauna around. But my point is that we can do a lot with the earth. We can make it even a better place with technology, and I believe that will happen. That's why I'm a techno-optimist.
So what is this this business that you're developing that
Okay,
let's talk about that.
sure.
That's really practical.
It's very practical. It's very practical. So I started a company called EyeQue about 10 years ago, literally in 2015. And I co-founded a company with a guy who started as a friend through our wives. So that's how guys make friends. Typically, wives act more as a social mechanism. I'm terrible socially. I don't do that kind of stuff very well. So we became friends. He was a physicist also in background. He came from Hungary, escaped after World War II when he was a little kid, because at that point the Russians were coming into Eastern Europe and making a mess, and they were killing a lot of the upper class. So he came from a rich family, came into the U.S. They grew up. Anyway, we met at these parties. We started to talk. We talk about AI. We talk about the automation. We talk about physics. Some of the cool stuff we're talking about in this event here. So one day, and by the way, he created the largest online eyeglass company in the world at that time. So it's called Zenni Optical. And the man's name was Tibor Laxe, who was a very dear friend and a very shrewd, intelligent, and a good man in so many ways. And I'm using the past tense because he did pass away. He had a very serious disease, and he passed away in 2021. But anyway, he said to me, John, why can't we create some sort of device that we can measure your vision? So if we can measure your refractive error, in other words, what strength, what type of eyeglasses you need, then that would be great for selling into his business, right? Because he sells eyeglasses if he now had a tool. So this is the actual tool that we built.
Yeah.
Costs a couple of dollars to manufacture, attaches to a smartphone,
Oh.
and you then take a test with it. And we've continued to improve it. So the technology works, a lot of patents, but here's the need. So, in the world today, in the US, there's fairly good vision care if you are middle class or above. If you're lower classes, you're not even going to see an eye doctor. There's many, many people in the US who have what's called uncorrected refractive error. They go through life, they can't read the fine print, they can hardly read big print. What do? They end up maybe picking tomatoes, they end up, having a lower life socioeconomically because they can't see well. There's a lot of people like that. There's in the United States, there's millions of people that fall into that category. Worldwide, it's hundreds of millions of people. So here's something that it started as a very capitalistic kind of, thing in mind. Let's build this thing. We can sell it. To more of a could really help the world. So continued to refine the technology. Tibor put the lion's share of the funding into the company. So we never went to VCs. We didn't go the traditional startup route. He let me work in stealth mode. I was basically the brains behind the outfit. He was the money, and sort of he had the big vision because he did have the vision of why can't we build this device for everybody? I started in a very modest way. I'd never expected it to go far. I said, we can build it. I think you can build something. We found MIT had a patent. I went to MIT, got the patent licensed, and there was some good things. We ended up building it. And, I learned so much from doing that. I don't want to spend all the time about all I learned on it. And I made lots of mistakes along the way as well. But it ended up that after about a year and a half, we went and said, okay, we're going to take this device and we're going to have people try it. So we built thousands of these. We got it out there. And it worked pretty well. And we went to the Consumer Electronics Show in 2017. We won all sorts of innovation awards over the years. And we became the concept of testing your vision at home vision testing. So, if you want to think of what's a catchphrase for EyeQue, it's home vision testing. And the company's brand is kind of focused in that arena. And we've expanded out over time. We've built different devices and other things. But one of the points is that you run into barriers with this kind of stuff. Okay. Medical technology, and I never worked in medical technology before. I always worked on big aerospace or physics projects. They were not people-centric, right? This was really different. And one of the things is, so the first questions I would get when I was out at a show or something, do you mean you're replacing optometrists? Okay, sounds like a nice, easy question. And of course, the answer is no, because a device is making a measurement. People equated the measurement to a prescription. It's not a prescription, it's a doctor-generated document. So we've been dealing with that gray space. We've been working with the FDA on this. The FDA lets us continue to use this technology, but they want us to do more. We did clinical trials with it. So there's a lot of work involved in it. We have to make the thing work better. And so this is what I'm doing. So, and in part, why am I doing it? I don't need to do it economically. At 70 years old and I've worked in all of these places. I'm comfortable, but I'm doing it in part because I just want to see this thing happen because there's a huge benefit. It's part of what we were talking about before, the change of our society. There's a disruption here. It's going to be much easier. Right now, the optical industry and particularly optometry in the US is very regulated. So whenever you try to do something different, it raises a lot of concern. And part of that is certainly a medical concern, but part of that is an economic concern. Is there going to be a technology that replaces me? So you have those frictional forces. And it's not just in ophthalmology or optometry, it's in virtually every medical field. And as I learn more and more about it, it's virtually in every field. Every time you bring a new technology in, there's going to be roadblocks. When the first cars came in, the first cars, by the way, were electric cars. And they hit roadblocks because who didn't like the first cars coming in? The railroads. They got very upset that someone can start to transport goods over long distances. Yeah, that was a problem. So, you've heard of red flag laws?
Yeah.
You know where that comes from?
Yeah.
It came from legislation back, I think, around the late 1800s, early 1900s, where when a car had to have a red flag in front of it when it was driving and it couldn't exceed 5 miles per hour, That was the law that came down and
Huh.
eventually got overturned. But that law was strongly influenced by the railroads. And so we're dealing with those sorts of things with a technology like this.
Well, I forget who said it, but it was someone. It was two different statements that were similar, and I think it was one was um, Frederick Jackson Turner, who um, was a historian who said um, in the late 1800s that the frontier is closed. And then there was someone else about the same time who said that there would be no more innovation, no more new things. Everything had been invented, and
Yeah.
yeah. And well, here's my question about your um, your device there. It sounds like uh, it would be an ideal device for deploying in the developing world, particularly in rural areas where you would have people who would have poor eyesight, but there's no way for them to. And then what you would need is an equally simple mechanism for producing the lenses for the glasses.
That's correct. That's correct. It's part of an ecosystem that has to evolve. And you go to many countries. So we've had these devices have been used in over 160 countries around the world. People have tried it. And now the good thing about a technology like this is it's a piece of plastic. It has two plastic lenses in it. It's a very safe device. So, whenever you have medical devices, people are always they're concerned about two things. One is safety, and the other is effectiveness, right? So with something like this, there's no question on the safety aspect. Now, the thing about a technology like this is it uses smartphone. All of the hard work that went into the display, the processing power, the communication power, EyeQue makes use of because we use all of that so that you can go and download an app and then run this and get results. So it's kind of, one of the points is it builds on technology that exists. Now, the good thing is this technology, smartphones, it's all around the world. It's a ubiquitous type of technology. People have Android phones all over. So you can use this in many places, and that's part of the thinking behind that. So
That's fantastic.
yeah, it's an adventure. It's an exciting adventure. And again, part of the reason is I had this theme going on. I want to give back because I've had many good things happen in my life. Many people have helped me, family members. My wife has helped me a tremendous amount. So, I want to give back. And I have this man, Tibor Lakse, who was a great man. And I kind of feel some obligation to still make it because he had the dream even more than I had it to kind of bring this thing
Oh yeah.
to a successful point. So I'm very motivated by that.
Well, I would call that living with honor, where the people that have made a difference in your life, you honor them by the way you live.
Yeah, it really is. It makes a difference. And what's in my case, I didn't appreciate that until about 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And I started to go back, the people at MIT, the physics department was very interested in me because well, I gave them some money. They were interested in that. But
Like,
they also said, so John, you're kind of you're out there as an entrepreneur doing this stuff. Not too many people do that. And so I developed that. And in the course of doing that, I appreciated how much I was helped by the people at MIT because I had a very hard time when I first went in there. and some people bent over backwards to help me get through at some point. So you don't appreciate that until decades later.
Yeah, I think
But
that's
here I am.
true for all of us.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great to have you here. I've enjoyed this very much. I want to stay in touch with you. I need someone to check my homework, my physics homework.
Oh, please. I enjoy doing that.
Um, but because I do think an important thing to understand. You'll appreciate this. I've just started reading Ilya Prigozhin. Uh, you know who I'm talking about?
No, no, I don't think so. Well, it sounded vaguely familiar, but I'm not sure what you're referring.
Prigozhin. He's written a book on time and matter, and was he created the what I think is called dissociative systems, something like it's way over. But I want to learn this stuff because so many of the people are like you who are very that I meet, and I want to be able to at least have a sense of what you're talking about, and but also to speak intelligently with you, out of a sense of appreciation for what you've had to learn to get where you are.
Well, none of us do it alone. I'm not a great physicist. Never thought I would be, compared to some of the people I know and I've worked with. And we all have to kind of appreciate all this around us, and it's not just physics, of course. I sound like I'm a physics groupie or something, but in all of these fields, so many people have helped bring our society to where it is today. It's amazing. There's one other point. I know we're closing, but there's more to everything than meets the eye.
Absolutely.
So there's a spirit. And, one of the things in my life always was when it's hard to describe what it exactly is, but it's sort of a positive energy. And almost it's so positive that you can affect the future. You can change things based on real positive outlook. And I've always seen that when I've been successful in life, it's when I've really applied sort of this positive outlook, this positive energy, and good things happened. It's supernatural in the sense that I can't explain it by a cause and effect. Oh, I worked hard and I saw this wonderful opportunity. It goes beyond just that sort of thing. So I think that's out there.
And I understand that very well. I totally agree with you. And I've made it for myself. I decided I would not allow situations to create anger and bitterness. That I'd always look, and even the people who would treat me badly, I'm always going to look at them and say, okay, what is there to affirm? What is there something good that I can identify? And if there's nothing, then it's clear that I do not need to be in relationship with them. But when you look at people and say, what is it that I can really affirm and appreciate, then you're going to overcome a lot of the negative feelings that you have about life.
This is a great point.
So let's keep doing it. And you do it on the West
Thanks.
Coast, I'll do it on the East Coast, and
Well, let's stay in touch.
yeah, there's a lot more to talk about. So I look forward to having you on again, and we'll talk about this great stuff another time.
Once again, Ed, thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you, meeting you, discussing these topics. I think I appreciate that I had the opportunity to express some of these ideas that I have.
Well, I'm glad that was possible, and I'm glad to have had that conversation with you. So thank you everyone for watching. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment because your comments really do matter. And I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. See you later. Bye bye. So